Welcome everyone. Super happy on behalf of the US-Mexico Foundation. Welcome to this introduction of a new paper that the foundation is publishing. This new paper is about cloud services, it's about economic development, it's about social development, the role of technology in a new context in Mexico, but also in North America. Also Mexico in relationship with US and with Canada. So we're super happy in the foundation for this tech paper. And let me thank first Alejandra Palacios and Ernesto Flores to explore, to do the research, to put in paper in this words, all the knowledge around cloud services and what we need to understand, what we need to know, how to take advantage of these new technologies, how to implement, how to connect SMEs with technology, with digitalization. And thanks also to Stony Burke, who is a member of the US-Mexico Foundation and who will moderate this panel. I invite you all to go into the website, usmexicofoundation.org, to explore the paper and other papers that we have. Thank you so much. Again, on behalf of the US-Mexico Foundation and our entire board, welcome to this session.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for your leadership at the US-Mexico Foundation. You know, it's really an honor and privilege to be on the board. It's a great privilege to be part of this conversation today. So much of the focus at the US-Mexico Foundation, you know, is on so many of these hot topics between the US-Mexico bilateral relationship, which includes immigration, security, supply chain, ally shoring, so many important topics in this bilateral relationship. But I'm really excited about our opportunity here to drill down into more of a tech focus, and in particular on cloud services. There really is so much opportunity for not just the bilateral relationship between US and Mexico as it relates to cloud services, but really the opportunity that Mexico is poised to be a leader in the Americas as it relates to a digital economy. And I love the work with Alejandra and Ernesto here, have done just phenomenal work with this paper. I'm excited to moderate this panel discussion here. So many interesting concepts. And just for the audience, as we go through this conversation, we're going to start on the outset with a conversation about cloud services, really a cloud services 101, because the technology is still somewhat new for a lot of audience members, and that's part of the reason for this paper. But then we'll drill a little bit deeper in the second half of the panel and dive into the impact directly to Mexico, both the opportunity and potential barriers for cloud services and digital economic growth there in Mexico. But to first, let's start off, Ernesto. Really would love for you to describe kind of the cloud services is such a large technology, takes on and really the backbone of the economy, particularly as we saw during the pandemic, as we shifted to so much of a digital environment, both in the public sector and private sector. It's almost difficult to kind of get your arms around cloud services. So talk to us about how you went about the approach in the beginning of the paper, where you talk about cloud services impact, not just on the economy, but the different type of cloud services that people have to choose from.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Tony. The way we approach this is, of course, first you have to look at what the definition of what we're talking about, right? The way we describe it is saying that it's on-demand delivery of ID resources over the internet, including everything. And by everything, it's like services, the servers, which is infrastructure, storage, data, software, and analytics. And this is all done through telecommunications networks. And usually they are people pay for them on a pay-as-you-go basis. Right? That's pretty much what it is. So we're talking about shared resources. This has a lot of advantages. The advantages are pretty straightforward, but are very important, which is where their economic and social impact come from. First of all, used to having everything together, used to having economies of scale. Economies of scale are very, very, very large in this industry. Imagine having everything together in one place where you can use the same electricity, same water, the same resources, the same computers, same mainframes, et cetera, That gives economies of scale. And then, of course, you get lower costs. When you get lower costs, most of them are passed over to users. So then you get lower prices. You get lower prices, you get a much higher demand, or at least a potential demand. Second thing is these cloud services can be accessed from anywhere. Right? And this is important because no matter where you are, you can actually use the resource. You don't have to go to the office to use whatever service, whatever software is there, or you don't need to be at home, right? Which is sort of what we're doing right now. But you pretty much can go anywhere through the internet, access all these services. Another very important aspect of this is what is called the rapid elasticity. This means that demand, and of course supply, is adjusted as on a need basis. Meaning, if suddenly you have a peak on demand when you're providing services, let's suppose a marketplace, there are peaks and there are lows. At the peak, they don't need to have the infrastructure for the demand because this demand can be satisfied at its peak by cloud services, and it adjusts as you go on. So that means that imagine a company that has to set its own servers, right? If they want to be able to satisfy demand at the peak, they have infrastructure enough for the peak, right? And most of the time, it's going to be unused. If you're sharing resources, the peaks of one do not coincide with the peaks of another of the users, and again, you get a much flatter curve. That is one of the advantages. It's much not only you don't get any unmet demand because you satisfy demand immediately, but you need to have all the infrastructure in place to be able to meet that demand. Another one, given that all the software and the operating systems are in the cloud and they get updated frequently, what you end up having is when you access cloud services, you're getting access to the newest or the latest version of whatever it is, the software, the service, the operating system. When you have it in your computer at home, you need to do the upgrade, right? Not only are they very expensive, but they take a lot of time, right? So people always end up with an old version of the system or of the software. Of course, this does not allow them to get the best features which are rolled out all the time, no matter what. Then, as I mentioned, these are shared resources. So what you have is capital expenditures are replaced by operational expenditure. That means that you don't need to buy all the software, all the servers. You don't need to have all the infrastructure to be able to handle them. What you do is you lease them, right? You lease them and you end up paying on a pay-as-you-go basis, which makes it much more affordable because you don't have a barrier to entry. It becomes an operational cost, which is, pretty much constant. Of course, it depends on how you use it, constant over time. So this is what we're talking about here. So we started by looking at what they were, what the big advantages were, and where Mexico stands in order to take advantage of those things. We looked at Mexico, what the bottlenecks are, how infrastructure looks in Mexico, how option and appropriation look, what the internet is being used for. And then we went on to say, well, what the bottlenecks are and what can be done about that. And this is, I think, the most important part of the paper, because in the end, we come out with policy recommendations that would help boost the growth of the adoption of cloud services in Mexico. We believe as a general purpose technology will allow pretty much every single industry out there in pretty much every social interaction to benefit from its use. So that's pretty much what we ended up doing in this paper.
Ernesto, I love that. I love that description and overview of cloud services. Again, a very complicated topic, that you're drilling down into synthesizing sort of the benefits, both as you described the consumer, and I want to drill down on that capital cost component and those cost savings a little bit more. Before I transition to Alejandra and a question around digital divide and entrepreneurship, but really those capital costs that you're alluding to seem to be such a critical component that allows those cost savings up front that really are the leading indicator that allow an entrepreneur or a startup, to take that next step in their journey to, launch their own business or their own app without those intensive capital costs that you were pointing to. So those cost savings is hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of dollars up front for a startup, and you've alluded to some of those costs in the paper. So I'd love it, Alejandra, if you could speak to sort of the journey that y'all talk about in the paper of addressing the digital divide and sort of the equalizing component that cloud services creates, for entrepreneurs, startups to really address that digital divide.
Yes, thank you, Stoney, for this interview, and it was great to work with the U.S.-Mexico Foundation on this topic. So, as Ernesto was saying, as he was describing the benefits of cloud computing, it makes it clear that as access to internet and certain infrastructure and also certain operating system lowers, and as the technology technology is available for more people, then it can be more accessible for the population in general, and especially, and that's one of the topics of the document, for small and medium-sized enterprises, which are starting to grow. They're starting to innovate. They're concentrated in making their business work. And so they don't need to be occupied on the software and infrastructure issue and access to the internet, because they can hire that service. So that's how you lessen the digital divide between big companies and small companies that can have access to these services. And then also, of course, as Ernesto was saying, when you hire these services and they're in the internet. So wherever you are, you can have access to these services. So it's not that in certain countries, you have access to certain software or infrastructure, and in other countries you have access to other services and infrastructure. As long as you have a broadband connection, and we'll talk about the importance of broadband connection to disseminate cloud computing services throughout the economy, then you can have access to these technology advancements. And then also a lot of new activities are being done through cloud computing. And these are activities that are sort of like new in terms of data analytics, in terms of Internet of Things. So those new technologies are also accessible for anybody who has access to the internet. So that also permits especially medium and small enterprises to be at the edge of what the technology is offering. So that's how the digital divide within a country, between big and small companies and between countries, lessens when you have access to cloud computing.
Thank you, Alejandra, and such a powerful statement to, again, the equalizing component technology can have, and in this particular case, cloud services. Kind of as y'all were approaching the paper, you also started talking about the enablers, right? I mean, there is really a public-private partnership that must occur. I mean, you alluded to some of the energy-related items, but can you talk a little bit more about what are the real enablers for cloud computing, both kind of what you've seen from your analysis in both the private and public sector that enables the growth and flourishing of cloud services?
What we saw in the document is that there's certain things need to happen so that you can have access to cloud computing services. So from a supply side perspective, the first thing you need to have is an internet connection. So you need to have internet access, and so broadband connectivity, as I had said, is really important. And it's not just whatever type of connection. You need to have a high quality connection, because, for example, if I'm going to download a video, if I don't have the bandwidth necessary to see that video fluidly, then it's a service that really does not help me. If I'm a company, as Ernesto was saying, if you're a marketplace and you're trying to sell something and they can't pay in the platform because the internet connection falls, then you lose that client. So that's why it's very important to have broadband connectivity. The other thing that's also very relevant in a supply side perspective is that Cloud computer services need electricity. They also need water, because all these infrastructure that Ernesto was talking about, you have those in data centers, and those data centers need to be on all day long. And so you need quality electricity. And then also you need water, because you need to, these servers, they get hot, so you need to cool them down. So data centers will only be installed in those places that can secure those that offer cloud computing services, high quality electricity, and also access to water. And then from a demand side perspective, those are the things that companies need to offer cloud computing. And then as a consumer, as a government, an individual, or a business, what do you need in order to adopt those services? So first of all, in your mind, you have to do a cost-benefit analysis. If I'm a company and I store a huge amount of data, I need to make an analysis between doing this capital expenditure, where I buy my servers and there is where I storage my data, or should I lease that storage space from a cloud computing services company? So those are the type of cost benefit analysis that you do as a person. But then there's also regulations. If I'm a company and I cannot hire these services because there's a regulatory restriction to it, then I cannot buy those services. So what we do in the document is we analyze how Mexicans are using the internet, and if they're using services that are related to cloud computing. And then what do we know about connectivity in Mexico? What's happening with electricity and water issues in Mexico? Are there regulations that hinder the possibility of individuals and companies to use cloud computing services? Another point that we talk about in the document is the government using cloud computing services? Is the government offering e-government services? Because if they offer those e-government services, normally they will hire cloud computing services, and then they will also force the population to use the internet in order to have interactions with government.
Alejandra, thank you very much, and gave us a great preview, particularly of where we're going to head in the Mexico conversation on sort of the government as enabler, and particularly the concerns around energy and water, right? That are such a connected part of the development of data centers anywhere, but in particular in Mexico. Before we dive a little bit deeper into Mexico and Ernesto, I'd love to turn to you. Quickly, Alejandro talked about was getting into the cost benefit analysis on cloud computing. And I'd love for you to expand a little bit about that before we dive into specifically on Mexico. Is can you speak to sort of the cost benefit analysis that y'all put together as an excellent table for readers once they get to the paper? I'd love for you to talk about your findings there and how you went about approaching that analysis.
Actually, I think it's very straightforward, right? I don't want to make it simple. But in the end, most businesses, not all of them, right? What we're talking about is that we're going to get new businesses, but most businesses that already use IT resources, right? And that's actually very high. And even in Mexico, it's over 90% of medium-sized company, right? The problem is the very small ones, and we'll talk about that later, right? But you already have the services. You have IT. You use IT resources in order for this entity to adopt cloud services. They need to switch the way they work, right? What they have, they want it all new. They need to buy everything new. A server is whatever $3,000 to $10,000, depending on what kind of server you buy. And then you need all the equipment around it, and then you need people to take care of it. You need human resources to operate your services side, right? And you're switching that to someone else doing all of that. You're going to pay for that, right? But in the end, what you're changing is how much do you pay up front, or how much you're going to pay on an ongoing basis, right? That's the most important part of the cost benefit analysis. For some, I think the number is very small. It's actually much better to do everything in-house than to outsource, right? For many reasons, probably because you have huge amounts of sunk costs, right? And sunk costs are always important, or because you would need to fully change your your model. But there are many other considerations that need to be made. Right? If you do it in-house, scalability and flexibility is not the same when you have it in-house as when you don't have it in-house, right? Actually, one of the promises of cloud computing services is that they're very flexible and that there's scale. Right? But then you have other things that you need to look at. Security for your needs. The security offered by cloud services is higher or lower than if you do it in-house, right? All cloud service providers are going to argue it's better to use the cloud services for that. But there might be a case where that is not. Then you need to look at latency. Latency is actually very important. How much does it take for the data to move back and forth, right? Of course, it all depends on what you're doing. Then I already talked about legacy and cost and CapEx. It all depends on the software, what kind of software you're using, and whether the software is attached to certain cloud services or not, right? Whether there's some sort of vertical integration. And then, of course, you need to look at the switching costs, right? So that's from the point of view of someone that already uses IT. When you don't use IT resources, the cost-benefit analysis is actually very easy, right? Because you get upfront versus leveling it throughout time, right? That lowers how much you need to start using these, how much you need to invest to start using these services, and you always get the latest version. So cloud computing becomes a no-brainer. Right? So for small SMEs, small because the penetration is still not there, or for very small companies, and by very small companies I mean micro companies, fewer than 10 employees, and many of them are mom and pop businesses, right? Or very small groups of people that rather put a business together. The only way they can use sophisticated computing services is through shared resources, right? And shared resources does not mean sharing it with your neighbor or with a business on the side. It means using resources that are put for everyone to be used. And that's actually what cloud services are, right? So it opens a whole world of opportunities for very small companies. And the cost-benefit analysis is obvious. Either you have no access, right? So the cost is infinite, or you have a moderate cost going forward, in which becomes an operating cost, and you have to factor that in, right? So then the cost-benefit analysis is different, and what they need to answer is whether they would need the services or not, right? But that is a very different question because it has to do with adoption. In adoption, appropriation, and understanding why is it that you need computing services.
Awesome, man, Ernesto, thank you. And again, I found that cost benefit analysis, and maybe for the economist and both of you, it's pretty straightforward. But I felt like y'all did a great job of capturing that in such a way, whether it was the security, latency, and other sort of switching costs and other things, made it so clear, for a user, sort of that cost benefit analysis as it relates to cloud services, that the startup community has been quick to adopt. As some of your more established entities that have to make that decision, Ernesto, as you're pointing to sort of those switching costs and other things. If you have been in business for 100 years, you built your digital infrastructure yourself, and making that decision is a tough one at times. And so that cost benefit analysis, I felt did a really good job of capturing sort of the decision tree a startup may have to make, which again, they don't have existing legacy infrastructure as a thought process there. But as an established business, they do, and you'll see in both instances. I felt like you did the paper did a great job of really showcasing, the benefit of cloud services for both types of customers. But let's dive deep into Mexico now. The heart of the paper, and really where I think readers are going to benefit so much after they get the lay of the land of cloud services in the first part of the paper. Really, the analysis y'all done on Mexico is phenomenal. I'm excited to talk about it because USMCA included the very exciting digital chapter that really was a big development as part of that renegotiation, and we know and think about so much of the physical goods and services that cross the border each day between the United States and Mexico, but really it was a great acknowledgement of the cross-border data flows amongst the United States and Mexico each day. And so I felt like that is really, I think, accelerated a lot of the digital economy on both sides of the border. So I'd love to really dive into the Mexico side of the paper, Alejandra, and start with you. Is kind of to give us the lay of the land, right now in Mexico, both internet usage and access for individuals and businesses, and sort of the opportunity that you see there for the growth of cloud services.
Thank you. So I was saying the digitalization of the economy is a far-reaching phenomenon everywhere, and Mexico is driving that curve. What we see is how the internet has been appropriated in Mexico. So you will find certain graphs where you will see the penetration of smartphones, the penetration of internet in the households, and the number of users. So just to give you a number, the number of internet users as a percentage of the population was of 57% in 2015. And now the penetration is 75%, which is around 88 million Mexicans. So that's the curve. And that's, as I say, it's a phenomena, and it's sort of unstoppable. Really the important question is, how can we make it faster? How can it be broadened in terms of having all the population and all businesses have access to these internet services because of the benefits we already commented? What we do next is analyze investment in broadband connectivity in Mexico. And there's an interesting graph that shows that Mexico is a country that has always lagged behind in terms of the amount of investment in broadband in Mexico, if you compare it with other OECD countries. There's also a paragraph explaining why it is sometimes, not sometimes, I would say always, difficult for telecom operators to install infrastructure, specifically in the last mile. And that last mile is relevant because if you don't have that last mile with good internet connectivity, then you have latency issues. So you can't use the internet as you could, because streaming or banking services or government services are falling. No, you're in the internet, you're buying something, or you're interacting with the government or whatever, and that service falls. So why would you use the internet if you can't have those services done?
Telecommunications networks have grown a lot, right? It would be unfair to say that the Mexican telecommunications sector has stalled. It's not, right? They are around $5 billion of investments every year. But as Alejandra has already said, that's not enough. We need a lot more. We actually have, even though numbers are very high, you have 80-something million people that use the internet one way or another, most of them, more than 80% of them, on a daily basis. You have 2/3 of households connected. You have medium and the large companies, all of them connected. I mean, of course, there are exceptions. The network is patchy. And by patchy, I mean there are a large number of areas in Mexico where you don't have network connect. Right? According to AFT, the regulator in Mexico, it's 25% of the municipalities in Mexico. It is very important to say that municipalities is not the same as people. Right? These 25% of the municipalities are small with very few people. And of course, they are the least well off in Mexico. So the network coverage goes hand in hand with affordability. People cannot afford to have an internet connection there. So the problem becomes not only a problem of supply, but also a problem of demand. And the only way of tackling this is with public policy. Right? But we'll get into that a little bit later. What we have, if you look at the numbers in the last years, we saw pretty good growth, which sort of switched the way it grew during the pandemic. So it's significant. Mobile networks, mobile users or mobile adoption totally slowed down, actually went almost down to zero. Whereas in the last 2 years, we saw 10 additional penetration points of households having a broadband connection. I mean, that's very substantial. The same thing with traffic. Traffic moved on into the fixed networks because of offloading, because you can go out right during the lockdown. During lockdown, here we're at home, period. And it's a lot, much cheaper to use a fixed broadband connection than a mobile connection. What we see, and this has to do a lot with digital literacy, is how it's used and why people don't have a network connection, right? Coverage, at least according to INEGI, which is the statistics office in Mexico, coverage is not a problem. Only 2% of households surveyed, and they will of the way they do the survey, right? Which is actually, I think, pretty accurate. It's not even 2% that they say they do not have a connection because there's no connection, right? There's no network. What's been constant through time is 9 million households say they cannot afford to pay a broadband connection. This is a problem of supply, price, and of course, pay for it, right? Because they're not cheap. What has decreased significantly, and it's like 250,000 people household every year, is people saying that they don't know how to use it or they don't know what it's good for, right? Which is good because it means that people understand what the value of an internet connection is. In that, if the trend continues, it'll be before the end of the decade. Pretty much, everyone will understand why you need to have an internet connection, right? We talk about this being a human right. It's a human right, but we need to understand what that human right is. It's not like water or food, right? It's a different level of a human right. Now, it should not be a surprise that there are 5 activities that are done on the internet. People use broadband connection to look for information searching, for communications, and communications is like what we're doing right now. Not only phone, voice, messages, but also video, entertainment, video consumption, which is not the same thing as entertainment, and then social networking. Those are the 5, and it's not very different from anywhere in Latin America, not even different from what the way they use in Europe or in the United States. But what has changed significantly in the last few years is education, right? The number of people that say that they use the internet for education has doubled in the last 5 years. And it's actually approaching those other 5 activities I mentioned first. And then you have the other ones which require an additional layer. And this additional layer is trust. By trust, I mean, you need to be able to trust not only using the technology, but the party on the other side of it, right? And that's very important for banking, right? And everything that has to do with finance, with payments, with selling, and with buying. Of course, shopping gets it, right? Shopping is a bundle of these things together. And these are the things that are little by little being more used in Mexico, but still they're not getting to 20 or they're still at 20 or 30% versus 80 or 90% of the others. And this is, of course, digital education. What we did see that grew significantly in the last couple of years is interaction of citizens and companies with government. Government's interaction actually more than doubled during the pandemic. People used to say 3 years ago that it was only 20% of people said that they did something with, for, or to for the government through the internet. Right now, it's a little bit over 50%. But this goes hand in hand with the government offering those services, right? It would be beautiful if we could all only interact with the government through the internet. I think we're still very, very far from that. But that's actually, in the end, one of the recommendations. Government is very powerful. It's very large. They can, if they, it has to be gentle, but they could gently foster adoption of broadband and cloud computing services through their offering those services.
Let's dig into that a little bit more, Ernesto. It's a perfect segue, to the Mexican government role here, and I love the conversation because it is such early days for most governments. And I remember when I was working in the United States Congress, the particular member of Congress that I worked for was a huge IT procurement champion. And you can imagine, as a chief of staff, those are not the sexy topics that really get you reelected. And so I always laughed about, we would, dig into IT procurement related issues. And this was 8-10 years ago. And really the instruments and vehicles that were put in place were the instruments and tools that really allow the federal government to deploy digital resources at a faster rate during the pandemic, right? I mean, there was the creation of what we had put together was a tech modernization fund for federal government agencies that wanted to migrate to cloud services. By having that vehicle at one point only had like 10 million, maybe $15 million a year in it. But when the pandemic hit and we had to move, and to your point, even on the Mexican government side, where your interactions go from less than 10% to over 50% in an online environment with your government, you have to have an agency in your governments that are moving faster, and migrating to cloud services to increase that digital experience for constituents. And so let's drill into this on the Mexican government side. One, not just as a customer, what it looks like and your document points to Pemex and CFE, which have the largest sort of IT workloads in the Mexican government, some of the largest, point to kind of what does the migration for the Mexican government look like to digital transformation right now? Sort of what is going right, kind of what are some other things that maybe they could be speeding adoption, both at the federal and state level for the public sector there in Mexico?
So, as Ernesto was saying, the increased users of government services grew tremendously in these past 5 years. And then there's also an interesting chart in the document that shows interactions with government from the business perspective. And that's interesting because large businesses, 95% have interactions with government. But that percentage is very low. It's less than 50% for medium and small businesses. So that's a huge opportunity. So Mexican government, as I would say every government in the world, with the pandemic also increased the use of cloud computing, because everybody had to offer certain services through the internet, specifically health services and educational services. Of course, the government is offering more services. Although what we found is that this is more like something that's like just happening, and it's not really planned. And what we know now is that governments should have digital agendas in order to promote technological advancement in their country. And specifically for cloud computing and procurement issues, Stony, that you're talking about, there's also a relevant analysis. So we were talking about how there's a benefit cost analysis that you need to do as an enterprise to decide if you switch to cloud or not. So that same analysis is needed to be done by governments. And the analysis is not straightforward. I would say it's even a little bit more complicated than for businesses. Because, as a government, you need to analyze if the provider you're going to choose has certain accreditation and security things put in place. But then also the government handles a lot of information which is confidential, and it would be tremendous that information would leak. So governments need to decide or need to classify that information previously than uploading that on the cloud. So you need to, as a government, you need to decide what type of information you need to have secure within your business or wherever your servers are, and what other type of information can live in the cloud. And then you need to have an adoption plan. So there's you were talking about the switching cost or the legacy cost. Government has tons of services and computers and all type of infrastructure, and they need to make a business case that letting that go and moving all that to the cloud saves you money. And then there's also a public procurement issue, because normally all public procurement laws were written when services like these on a pay-as-you-go model did not exist. So normally procurement laws in Mexico and around the world are not thought for buying these types of services. So maybe you need modifications in your law in order to buy the cloud. So what we see in many countries, and those that are that have more technological adaptation, is that there are country digital agendas and also cloud first policy agendas. So one is, what do you do as a government to push forward digitalization in your economy? And the cloud first policies is, what do I have to do as a government in order to move part of my information to the cloud? And Mexico lacks of both things. There's very few countries in Latin America that don't have a digital agenda, and Mexico is one of those. From what I know, the government has never put forward a cloud first policy forward. So that's something that, I mean, that's a big recommendation in the document, and I think it's something that the Mexican government should do. There's a lot of spillovers for government adopting cloud. One has to do, as Ernesto explained, is as you offer services online, you digitalize your population. But then the other is, if the government puts forward a cloud first policy, then it's sending a signal. And that creates an investment ambience in terms of, I mean, if the government is committing to hire certain services, then cloud computing providers will be interested in offering those services in Mexico, and they will bring them, and that will lower the price for government, but for everybody who uses those services. So that's why, I mean, those are the two important pivots that governments do when they commit to using cloud services.
Alejandra, that's a great summary on the Mexican side, in particular, the opportunity there, and that truly the adoption of commercial cloud services is such a public-private partnership. I mean, it has to require, leadership on behalf of government officials that are taking that leap to not only push public sector workloads and priorities into cloud services, but sends the right message for investment. I mean, as y'all note in the paper, I mean, these are billions of dollars in investments, physical data center and infrastructure investments in Mexico, and they have to require. There's a strong government component to that, of course, as it relates to water and electricity and building out data center regions. And so that requires a partnership with the government, but it also requires that customer growth and opportunity by the public sector, both at the federal, state, and local levels. So I love the overview, Alejandra, there of the sort of state of play in Mexico and sort of the leadership necessary to get to the next level. And we're almost at time here. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and a great representation of the paper that I think many people are going to enjoy and benefit from on the lay of the land. But I'll open it up for any last comments. Ernesto, Alejandra, as we're closing out here. Again, I could be happier with this document and the way that it gives such a great introductory aspect to cloud services, but also the really detailed aspect on Mexico. I don't think there's not a paper out there that describes the environment in Mexico right now and the digital economy. So what a great benefit that's going to be for readers, and thank y'all for y'all's work and putting that together. Any other last comments?
Yeah, I'll just comment two things real quickly that we didn't touch upon in this document and I think are relevant. One is there's a section in the document that speaks about digital literacy and how it is important for the government to develop digital skills within the population. 88 million Mexicans use the internet regularly. But one thing is that you can use it to see a mail or download a video. And then another thing is that you can use it for productivity reasons, make a document, use it in a marketplace, make a transaction, and then there's more sophisticated things that engineers can do. If as a Mexican society, we're having a hard time reading and writing and having minimal math skills, it's sort of difficult to envision that we're going to be great manipulating digital, the new digital technology. So that's one of the relevant aspects of the document that I think it's important to touch upon. Computer service providers have climate change or environmental commitments in terms of that the electricity they use to power those data centers eventually need to come from clean energy. And if Mexico wants to be a hub for having data centers in the country, it needs to offer clean energy. I mean, we can have cloud services that come from other countries because the data centers are elsewhere. But if we want to have a data hub in Mexico, we need to offer clean energy.
Look, I think Alejandro sort of laid the groundwork for the next iteration, the next chapter in the future as we look at workforce and clean energy commitments, right? I mean, I think that is core to any sort of digital economy is that, how do we meet, the clean energy goals, not only that companies make, but countries make as well, and their commitment to climate change. And so there has to be, again, that public-private partnership, but the same thing with workforce, and one of the key things of having growing digital literacy is having those job opportunities after graduation. And I think there's a next stage of this conversation that we'll be talking about, from a technology standpoint, is what does that digital workforce look like in Mexico? And, how is that both grown from company commitments, but government commitments as well? So Alejandro, I thank you for calling that out and a good preview of some other conversations to come around the digital economy in Mexico. So thank you very much for the time today, and thank you so much for the work put into this particular paper. We're excited to release it at the U.S.-Mexico Foundation, and I'll turn it back over to Enrique.
No, thank you very much. And just again, for all the audience, the viewers, go to the webpage, www.usmexicofoundation.org, and you will find all the research, all our papers, and in particular, this one. Thank you very much, Ernesto, Hannah, Stony. See you next time.